Hello guys, James here. I'm going to talk about a different topic today. Going back to this is very interesting. And did you know that there were some Latinos that were part of a hate group that were part that they are skinheads? Did you know that there are certain places in Latin America that have that they celebrate Nazis? Like in Brazil, there's a place outside of Brazil, and they celebrate Nazis. Um, then there's another area, and usually, I think when it comes to the certain camps, I think they got it wrong with the Hebrew Israelites when it comes to the different groups, because something ain't adding up. And I'm gonna tell you why. Not to mean I mean throw them in there, but it's kind of like some people don't go along with the black and brown coalition. The first video I'm going to show you is Professor Truth. Then I'm going to show you a young man who is Hispanic, and he breaks down racism in Latin America, in Latin countries. So, furthermore, I'm going to start with Professor Truth.
Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this
is the guy who shot up.
People are shocked to find out that the neo-Nazi who just carried out a mass murder in Texas was Latino. Not some light, bright, almost white Shakira type, but a brown-skinned mestizo. And he'd been online posting pictures of himself with Nazi tattoos. He would frequently make racist posts referencing the white supremacist sewer 4chan and other Latino white supremacists like Nick Fuentes. This guy posted his videos freely on YouTube, and you'll notice that YouTube didn't do anything about this guy until after he committed a mass murder. Meanwhile, they attack the black media. Channels like this are constantly having their videos struck or having their accounts terminated. People who don't advocate hate or violence, but their accounts get attacked simply because they point out that we're being mistreated and who's doing it. YouTube has been a willing haven and breeding ground for these white supremacist killers to spread their violence. But so is the white media, and they're shocked, I tell you. They simply can't comprehend that a brown-skinned Latino would align himself with white supremacists, the very people who say that people like him need to be kept out. You have white media figures on CNN, MSNBC, all the major channels, and including the agenda-setting white media like the New York Times and the Washington Post and such. They're all on the same talking point, saying that to have a Latino as a neo-Nazi is something that's unprecedented. This has never happened before. But is that true? Now, obviously, Mauricio Garcia doesn't represent the entire Latino community, obviously, but it's false to say that he was just some one-of-a-kind anomaly. He's not. And there's plenty of precedent for this. The black community has been saying that this has been an issue for decades now, but we were ignored by the very white media who today is speechless. In a nutshell, there's cognitive dissonance going on here on a major level. Many Latinos, not all, but enough, see themselves primarily in terms of their national origin. Mexican, Guatemalan, Honduran, etc. So when people talk about building walls and mass deportations, for a lot of Latinos, they look and say, well, they're not talking about us, they're talking about those Latinos over there. The U.S. classifies them as minorities, or people of color. But as the New York Times had to report, Latinos choose to identify as white. But how do you do that in a society that says you're not white? As many as are able identify themselves as white on school applications, employment applications, and driver's licenses. This is something the white media has completely refused to even discuss, but all they did was to allow the problem to grow until now something has happened that can't be ignored. As we, the black media, have reported to you for years now, for the longest time, the leaders of some of the most virulently white supremacist groups have been Latinos. For example, Stuart Rhodes, founder and leader of the Oath Keepers. His mother is a mestizo Mexican. Enrique Tarrio, leader of the Proud Boys, who was so eager to prove that he was a white supremacist, he targeted a historically black church in D.C., tearing down their Black Lives Matter banner right outside of the church, and then burned it, and took photos of himself because he wanted everyone to see this is how much contempt he had for black people. That was an act of domestic terrorism that he committed, but the white authorities decided that it would just be sloughed off as destruction of property. And of course, course, you can't forget about Nick Fuentes, one of the most outspoken and obnoxious online racist and anti-Semites out there. These guys make it a point to go to insane, cartoonishly stupid lengths to prove their devotion to white supremacy, doing things that the white racists themselves don't do. It would be funny if it wasn't for the fact that they're hurting people and in some cases getting people killed. The white media is shocked that this Latino neo-Nazi was a regular visitor to 4chan, but if you follow the black media, then you already know I've regularly reminded you about the 4chan terrorist who attacked a Black Lives Matter rally in Minneapolis. One of the terrorists who planned the attack was a Latino. In fact, he's the one you see holding the gun. His name is Julio Suarez. On 4chan, he went by the screen name Saiga Marine. Suarez was the one who ended that terrorist threat video by saying, "Stay white." Earlier this year, you had Solomon Pena, the New Mexico terrorist and felon who went around shooting up the homes and offices of 5 Democratic Party politicians. He espoused all kinds of far-right rhetoric, and he was a contributor to LaRouche PAC, founded by the notorious anti-black racist Lyndon LaRouche. But the problem isn't just limited to Latino racists on the right. Another example is Alexandria Cortez. When she was first running for Congress, she gave a now infamous interview on MSNBC where she boldly renounced any and all other ancestry she had, particularly black. She wanted to make sure she got that out first. She renounced everything except for her white ancestry.
My identity is the descendant of many different identities. I am the descendant of African slaves. I am a descendant of indigenous peoples. I'm a descendant of Spanish colonizers. I am a descendant of all sorts of folks. That doesn't mean I'm black. That doesn't mean I'm, native. But it does mean that I can use that as I can tell the story of my ancestors. That doesn't mean that I am that.
She talks out of both sides of her mouth. In the same breath, she admits that she has African ancestry and then immediately says that doesn't make her black. She said she's a descendant of Spanish colonizers, but you notice she didn't dare say, "But that doesn't make me Spanish." She renounced her African and Indian ancestry, so why not the Spanish part too? After all, she's a mix of things, as she said, right? Except she wasn't about to renounce the Spanish ancestry. She considers herself to be a white woman. Nobody else does, but she would still like to be seen as that. This is the problem with so-called intersectionalism. When these individuals talk about their ethnicity, they deny being black immediately, even though that black ancestry is the very first thing people notice when they look at them. But none of them decides, well, when it comes to white, I gotta go ahead and say I ain't white either. Instead, they say, well, I'm all of those things. But when you ask them for specifics, they immediately say, but I'm not black. Don't say I'm black. And more recently, the racist Latino LA council members who were calling a black toddler a monkey and planning how they were going to lock black Angelinos out of any and all arenas in the city, they were happily sitting in a room planning with each other how they were going to be running the city along racial lines, specifically for the express purpose of locking black people out. Especially that Nuri Martinez witch. She made it very clear black people are her enemy, not because black people did anything to her, but just because black people are black. But they didn't stop there, of course. They also disparaged other Latinos, particularly the Osakans, because their skin is darker than the racist Latinos who were on the LA City Council. So the leaders of the most important Hispanic enclave in the United States were acting and talking like every other white supremacist you've ever seen. And these weren't Republicans or right-wingers doing this. These were Latinos on the left. Anti-black racism is a bipartisan issue. And this isn't new at all. You can go all the way back to Felix Tijerina, who was the president of LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. At the height of Jim Crow, somebody proposed that LULAC ally itself with the NAACP. Tijerina's response? Let the Negro fight his own battles. His problems are not mine. I don't want to ally with him. Now, whenever Latinos are trying to get something, or whenever some white supremacist harms one of them, the very first thing we hear is, we're all in this together, Black-Brown Alliance. And then black people wonder why the Black-Brown Alliance never seems to materialize. And in the cases of Tario, Rhodes, Suarez, the LA City Council members, Tijerina, and even Alexandria Cortez, they all identify themselves as white, even though the society doesn't. These are just a few examples from the last few years alone. The only legitimate confusion comes in reason that many Latinos claim to simultaneously be a minority when it suits them, and then mark themselves as white on all their documentation. So we have individuals who identify simultaneously as minority and white. That's the issue. Okay, but how does this link to Latin America? To understand this problem, we need to take a look at Latin America specifically and its brutally racist past, and how they still celebrate it to the present. Take Brazil, for example. There's a town down there called Santa Barbara do Oeste. For the last 40 years, they've had an annual festival in which they bring out Confederate flags and dress up in Civil War attire and cosplay as being Confederates for a day. And why do they engage in this bizarre ritual? Because following their defeat in the Civil War, thousands of Confederates went to Brazil, even forcing hundreds of black people that they had enslaved to be their prisoners there until 1888, when Brazil finally got around to abolishing slavery. And these Brazilian Confederates celebrate that every single year. On a side note, next time some white supremacist tries to tell you that the Confederacy was about states' rights, it wasn't about no slavery, you remind them of this. Thousands of unreconstructed Confederates went to South America, and when they got there, what's the first thing that they did? All right, let's get this slavery thing going again. Yeah, it was all about slavery in any country they went to. And Latin America's long-standing tradition of colorism and racial segregation made it a magnet for white supremacists all over the world. There's a reason that the Nazis fled to Latin America after World War II, and it wasn't just Argentina they went to. They went to places like Peru, Chile, and others, because of the blatantly white supremacist regimes that have run things down there and are still in charge today. You look at the political changes that have happened in Latin America in the last 20 years, and they've been all about race. In Venezuela, you had Hugo Chavez, who fought to break the stranglehold of the Blanco ruling class in that country. Venezuela's Blanco elites had been impoverishing their own citizens for centuries, and when Chavez came along, they made it clear they understood him to be a black man. Chavez himself confirmed as much. The Blanco elites in Latin America have frozen their nations in time. Well, at least in Venezuela, the ice began to thaw when Hugo Chavez was elected. The United States, seeing that their white supremacist stronghold down there had fallen, funded and organized a coup to oust Chavez. And don't let the white media water down the facts. The CIA didn't just know about the Venezuelan coup, they were the ones behind it. And the Venezuela coup plotters' very first act upon seizing control of the government was to announce that they were abolishing the Venezuelan Congress, the Venezuelan Supreme Court, and they even abolished its constitution. They were getting rid of every branch of government that could have opposed them, and even the nation's laws. That meant that the coup had established that the only government in Venezuela was the presidency, which they had control of. That was an autocratic government that seized control of a democratic nation. Though you wouldn't have known it by how the U.S. reacted, here was an undeniable case of an autocratic regime taking over a country, and the U.S. was fine with it. But what the U.S. didn't like was that Chavez's support from the Venezuelan people was so overwhelming that the military, who were loyal to him since he had been a soldier too, they went and rescued him from the island where he had been imprisoned, and they restored him to office. And as for the Blanco coup plotters, now they were the ones forced into exile. And where did they go? Straight to the United States, who had nothing to do with the coup, mind you.
Whoa.
Then Hugo Chavez died under mysterious circumstances. He suddenly got a case of cancer. By the way, I don't believe that. I think the U.S. pulled a Vladimir Putin and used some sort of radioactive poison to kill him, but still, the Chavista revolution wasn't so easily defeated. Nicolas Maduro was Chavez's hand-picked successor, and the U.S. has been trying to overthrow him ever since, using the old playbook of calling him an undemocratic regime, etc. But Maduro is still there, and so long as he's in office, the Blanco ruling class cannot come back to power. And the same thing happened in Bolivia. Evo Morales was an indigenous labor leader who clearly isn't white, but he beat the Blanco candidate to become president of Bolivia multiple times. And then he became the target of a coup as well, which clearly the U.S. was not behind, because the U.S. couldn't wait to recognize the Blanco woman who was installed to usurp him. Janine Áñez is a dyed-in-the-wool, obnoxious racist, basically a female version of Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro. Speaking of Bolsonaro, he played on Latin America's obsession with race to gain power, but it was only because of former President Lula da Silva's massive popularity that Bolsonaro was eventually voted out. Race is at the center of it all. White supremacists hate that black people point this out because they know it's the truth. When we point out anti-black racism outside the U.S., the racists immediately start howling, "You can't apply American racial dynamics to other countries." Actually, we can. From celebrating the Confederacy to attacking political candidates simply for being black, it's exactly the same. Not because we say so, but because the anti-black racists in these foreign countries say so. So we cannot separate the deeply ingrained and flagrant anti-black racism of Latin America from the behavior of an Enrique Tarrio or a Mauricio Garcia. It is not some victimless crime to play footsie with white supremacy, though in the case of Enrique Tarrio and others, they've gone from flirting to consummating the relationship outright. Why is it that so many people from groups who are not white and certainly not Aryan go overboard to commit acts of violence in the name of white supremacy? Because they're auditioning for a position as members of the oppressor class. When you see these non-white white supremacists doing mass killings, that's them sending a message saying, "Yoo-hoo, over here, I'm one of you, see?" And why mass violence in particular? Why is that always the go-to method that these white supremacists use to try to prove their white supremacist bona fides? It's because for hundreds of years this country has always made it clear that when these newcomers or these other groups who are non-Anglo or non-Caucasian or what have you, if they want to be accepted, then they have to show that they're on board with the racial hierarchy and helping to maintain it through violence. That's why I gave you the definition of white supremacy the other day. The absolute control of society using physical, economic, political, and social violence. And that's the pattern that's played itself out for at least the last 150 years. The Irish came to this country and had signs that said "No dogs are Irish allowed." But as soon as the draft riots occurred and they started beating black people in the streets, those signs started coming down. Italian immigrants came to the U.S. and were called all manner of racial slurs. But when they wanted acceptance from the dominant society, they began attacking black people, and all of a sudden they got honorary white status. And the same pattern continued with immigrants from Asian countries, as we've seen with Dinesh D'Souza, Amy Chua, Michelle Malkin, and others. And that also includes the immigrants who have come from south of the border. Black people have pointed this out for decades. After the LA City Council race scandal broke, people couldn't ignore it anymore, but they didn't do anything to fix it either. There were some people who were holding hands, and we immediately saw declarations that the racial divide had been healed. But nobody is fooled. This is sweeping the problem under the rug again, and it won't work. And now that the problem has manifested itself in a way so grotesque that it simply can't be wallpapered over this time, does anyone think that the white media who's ignored this issue until now will suddenly start to look at the big picture and say maybe we need to talk about it? Will they look at the Enrique Tarrios, the Stuart Rhodes, the Nick Fuentes's, the Mauricio Garcias, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes, and ask why so many Latinos want to be white supremacists themselves? Or will the white media try to wait this one out and see if it goes away with the next news cycle or the next mass shooting? My money is on the latter.
So you say maybe that was Professor Black, true, with some good facts, but he wasn't the only one that covered this topic. There was a guy, his channel called Bother Roy. Check out what he said.
So if you're not trading like these people are right here, all these people right here,
you're gonna
you'll
be shocked on this one.
Losing money. That's
Hi, Bother Brigade. Here's what's bothering me today. There's been yet another mass shooting in the United States of America, and this time it's quote-unquote different because while the shooter posted a manifesto, I know we're not really going to talk about that in detail, but it kind of just does the whole typical right-wing neo-Nazi bullcrap. And what's different about it this time is that the shooter was Latin American or Mexican American or Hispanic American, all sorts of terms to try and point out, hey, he's not white, so how could he be a neo-Nazi if not white? Checkmate, leftists. So today, as a Latino, it's time for me to unfortunately inform everyone about how racist the subcontinent is, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So apparently it needs to be said, yes, Latin Americans can be white supremacists. there are a ton of white Latin American people. In fact, there are several countries that are majority white in Latin America. Uruguay, Argentina, Costa Rica, and Chile and Cuba are all majority white. And without even looking there, just a casual look at America also reveals that you have very racist, practically Nazi and all but name people who also happen to be of Latin American descent. Nick Fuentes' father is Mexican-American. Ted Cruz is an American-Cuban, sometimes known as a Gusano. One of the most famous leaders of the Proud Boys is Enrique Tarrio. He's also Latin American. All three of these little awful ghouls have Latin American heritage, and two of them are definitely white passing, but all of them definitely have white supremacist neo-Nazi vibes to them. I also remind people that the Americas were first of all colonized by the Portuguese and the Spanish, who are European and thus brought the ideas of European race and religion and civilization to the Americas and inflicted all those unspeakable horrors upon my indigenous ancestors. And my black ancestors too, for that matter. So since we're talking about race and civilization, air quotes, in Latin America, let's talk about the casta real quick. If you've heard the term mestizo or mulatto, you are already at least somewhat familiar with the casta. The casta was a racial and social identifier used by the Spanish to determine someone's lot and worth in life, basically. There were all kinds of terms for socially identifying who was actually who on the ladder. So, if you're half black and half white, this is what you are, and that's where you fall on that social ladder, as a very brief example. At the absolute top, however, you had peninsulares and criollos. Now, peninsulares were white people who were actually born in Spain and then came over to, wreak hegemony on America. And then criollos were white people who were born in the New World. That's right, shit was so white and so prejudiced that they had to make two different distinctions for the types of white people, and the peninsulares were seen as better and the criollos as inferior. Like, oh my god. And so these privileged few, these peninsulares and criollos, they start, setting up what would become the foundations of all the different Latin American states by displacing and or murdering indigenous people and also, by the way, enslaving them. What ends up happening is you have various different systems. The encomienda, which dealt with a lot of slavery and how they were entitled to certain groups of people and their labor, like, what the actual hell? And then you also had systems like the hacienda and the latifundia. Now, the latifundia was basically you would be given like a large landed estate to which you were entitled all the monetary rewards thereof. These were given to churches, these were given to like wealthy aristocrats from Spain or from Portugal, and the hacienda was kind of at the center of all that, where it was like your big estate slash a factory. That's part of where hacienda comes from. It comes from the Spanish verb hacer, meaning to make or create. And so that was sort of the center of all of this. Yes, here on my massive slave plantation that stretches out to the horizon as far as the eye can see, and all these slaves, the indigenous ones keep dying, so I guess we better get the transatlantic slave trade started. Come on over here, Africans, we gotta work you to death so I can just sit here on my porch, on my hacienda, while everyone's making stuff so I can get richer and richer. This happened pretty much everywhere. Now, there were some places that didn't have as much slavery, but this was basically everywhere from Mexico to Brazil and everywhere in between. So this is all at the very beginning of Latin American history, right? And already you are seeing massive amounts of inequality, racial prejudice, slavery, and all the wealth being concentrated into the hands of a handful of white people who decided, from the get-go, by the way, to implement this casta system of racial stratification, while they were, again, abusing and enslaving and extracting wealth from the land and the people that were either indigenous to there or brought over as slaves from Africa. So yeah, the legacy of all of this is a continent that speaks Spanish, is predominantly Catholic, and is overwhelmingly racist. Far too many conflicts to count from Latin America have been started due to a power struggle, either between criollos or the landed criollo estate class versus the majority, either mestizo or indigenous or some other marginalized population that rose up in rebellion saying, hey, you're talking about this democracy and representation stuff, can we get some of that? And then the criollos would basically say, no. go to hell. Think about the recent coup in Peru and how that was meant to protect the landed interests in Peru. Or even the one that came before that in Bolivia with Janine Áñez and like a selection of a handful of white Bolivians who said, oh no, these poor indigenous Bolivians, they don't know how to run things, so we gotta take over and show them how it's really done. Like, this is not an uncommon part of Latin American history. In fact, there's a term for what it means to actually improve the country. Blanqueamiento. Blanqueamiento is literally the idea of whitening your people and your nation. See, we're getting more and more white and therefore more and more civilized, because that's what our ancient slave master Spaniards and Portuguese people imprinted in our subconscious. You don't have to look far or hard to find racist Latin Americans or Hispanic Americans. Like, whether they are born and raised in the United States or they are found elsewhere throughout Latin America, it doesn't really matter. You can find this easily. Like, I feel like I'm just kind of in this weird space of, oh yeah, I'm perfectly aware of all this, and people are suddenly shocked to be like, oh no, it's impossible for brown people to be racist, and it's like, that's because not all Latin Americans are brown people, and that's part of why we have a huge race and colorism problem in the Latin American community. As a grim example, my father is Afro-Latino. Technically, he's a Zambo, si la casta for that, but he's as Latin American as just about anyone, and yet, because of his skin color, he is greeted with racism by a great many other Latinos. We should also maybe talk a little bit about the Dominican Republic and their whole relationship with race, but I'm not Dominican, and I couldn't get my Dominican friends to like immediately respond before I started recording this, so that's probably going to have to be like a subsection for a different time, but it's definitely very weird and very sus. As a starter of getting your feet wet into this subject, Foreign Man in a Foreign Land released a pretty good video that touches on the Dominican view of race and how they view Haitians and blackness, so you should definitely go check that video out if you haven't already. But I am just so flabbergasted and exhausted by this notion that, oh no, this mass murder couldn't possibly have been a neo-Nazi because, see, he is Latin American or Mexican American or some kind of identifier that in my mind I think means non-white. There can't possibly be neo-Nazis in such a diverse place like Brazil, and it's like, yeah, actually, there are. There are absolutely white supremacist Latin Americans in Latin America and in the United States. You're probably, again, as I mentioned near the top of this video, you're probably familiar with at least one or two of them. This is not uncommon, and all this really is at the end of the day is the right wing trying very hard to distance themselves and their awful, racist, bigoted ideology and trying to put it on, you know, it's that kind of excuse of, no, see, I can't be racist towards black people. Here's my one black friend. It's just really weird and awful tokenization. And unfortunately, that's the emerging narrative, and people are still shocked to find out that there are white supremacist Latin Americans. All that is definitely what's bothering me today.
What do you think a Latina looks like? Many people see someone like her, or even her. That's just one of the reasons why so many black and indigenous millennials of Latin American descent are moving away from the term and canceling Latinidad. Today's baggage, the anti-blackness of Latinidad. Latinos are having a moment, but while Latinidad is all over mainstream media, more and more people are calling out the blatant whiteness of it all. Latinidad is a term used to acknowledge and link the collective experiences and cultures of people from Latin America. That song was my jam! It derived from the word Latino, which was first seen in California newspapers in the 1850s. Forget what you heard. The words Latino and Hispanic are completely different. According to scholars, Hispanic links Latin Americans to Spain, its cultures and traditions, with an emphasis on the language. So folks who are actually from Spain would be considered Hispanic. But this wouldn't be the case for Brazilians, for example, because they speak Portuguese. On the other hand, the term Latinx refers to people from countries south of the United States. Latinx people share the experience of being colonized. Colonizers are not included in Latinidad.
Don't scare me like that, colonizer.
And while for some the term Latinidad is associated with pride,
Mainly white Latinx folks.
for others it's become associated with oppression. To understand why some millennials in the US are rejecting the term, you gotta understand the history. Let's take it back a couple of centuries to what's now known as Latin America. Now, we done told y'all about the transatlantic slave trade some 50-11 times on this series, but stick with me. During the slave trade, over 10.5 million enslaved people arrived in the Americas, and slave ships made multiple stops before arriving upon these North American shores. In fact, over 90% of the enslaved were dropped off in the Caribbean and South America. And even after emancipation in the various Latin American countries, the treatment of black people in those spaces was no better. Tanya Hernandez is the author of Multiracials and Civil Rights and a professor at Fordham Law. She's a black Boricua who's done extensive work on racial discrimination and subordination in Latin America, so I had to track her down.
Within Latin America, we have a long history of anti-blackness. We had many more people of African ancestry, and so that history of enforced slavery has a very long legacy within Latin America. And it's said that outside of Nigeria, in Brazil, is thought to be a location with the highest percentage of people of African descent. Given that density of people of African ancestry coexisting at the same time with their lack of social mobility, what you instead see is a social hierarchy that is a racial caste system. And Latin Americans would say, oh, well, it's a class issue. But when a class issue is so completely coalescing with a pigmentocracy, then it's hard to say it's only about class. And when I refer to this term of pigmentocracy, what I'm referring to are the ways in which there is a social hierarchy that is arrayed from light to dark, with light being places with the most economic success, the most greatest access to socioeconomic opportunity, and darker spheres with less. And the only sort of additional nuance in that is that you could have light skin, but if you have African features or African hair texture, then that lowers your currency.
Given this obsession with whiteness, it's no surprise that throughout Latin America, there were government-led efforts to make countries majority white. In Brazil, it was called branqueamento, and in many parts of Latin America, blanqueamento. The term literally means whitening.
But what is fascinating to note is that after the emancipation of slavery, what you instead see is a turn to the use of immigration law to diminish the access and the mobility of recently emancipated slaves. Like in Argentina and in Brazil in particular, where they had the funding for this, they sort of opened the doors to European immigration. In Argentina, the population doubles after the emancipation of slavery because of the open door policy for European immigration.
Beyond bringing Europeans into Latin American countries to literally lighten the race, Hernandez also said that there were restrictions on the lives of people of African ancestry, like the types of jobs black people could work, the Afro-spiritual religions that they practiced, and even the quality of their education. So, Latin America, y'all think that you're not guilty of institutionalized racism led by the hand of law? As Hernandez points out, the state law played a huge role in Latin America's anti-blackness some time ago. But the racist ideologies and aspirations of whiteness, though more subtle, still exist even in the United States. What do you think? Generations of racist conditioning are just gonna magically disappear? Like when you walk into a Dominican hair salon and have stylists refer to your hair as pelo malo, which translates to bad hair. I mean, this is what Latinidad looks like according to mainstream media. With BS like this, no wonder black and indigenous millennials of Latin American descent are calling for Latinidad to be canceled. Hashtag Latinidad is canceled is a social media movement all about reclaiming identity. Afro-Indigenous poet and cultural worker Alan Lopez helped popularize the cancel party. And many prominent voices like journalist and founder of the blog Una Latina, Janelle Martinez, are also moving away from Latinidad. How do you choose to identify yourself?
I personally choose to identify as a black woman first and foremost. I also, given my family lineage being Garifuna, I will use that as well. I do go by Afro-Latina, but in recent years my sentiments have sort of shifted a bit from using the term because I feel it's important to center my blackness. This thought comes from a recent piece I wrote, Ora Mezcla, when discussing Latinidad, who is included and who isn't.
We saw that piece, honey.
So the thing about Latinidad, right, as noted in the piece, is it definitely serves a very narrow audience. It doesn't necessarily ideas around nationalities, our racial and gender identities, our status, and for me, Latinidad ultimately serves white, cisgendered, straight, wealthy men, right? And I am none of those. I'm at the margins of this term.
What gaps exist within Latinidad?
Talking about 33 Latin American and Caribbean nations, Haiti doesn't get included in the conversation, and being Garifuna even, right? Like, my culture's native tongue is not even Spanish, it's Garifuna. Oftentimes when people speak to this sort of, again, monolithic, unified term to encapsulate all these identities, there's a lot of holes in that.
Can you speak to some specific ways that we've seen this anti-blackness in pop culture?
I think Spanish language media has very blatant issues. You can still, on occasion, see blackface. People in Espanol, they always come out with their 50 most beautiful people issue. This year they had Yalitza Aparicio, who is the amazing indigenous actress. Last year they had Amara La Negra. In past years, of course, they had like Zoe Saldana, amongst others. But to also send out that intentional message that there can only be one at a time, or when we do feature someone, primarily a black or indigenous woman, we're going to lighten her, we're going to place her in frumpy attire while everyone else is dressed very appealing, really sends a strong message not only to the consumers of the magazine, but this next generation.
And the message is that you're an afterthought, if even considered at all. With all the baggage that comes with the term, Latinidad, girl, you in danger. Hernandez says the issue is that Latinidad tries to create a uniformity, but this doesn't exist.
There is not necessarily this happy, race-free dynamic within Latinidad.
Essentially, this homogeneity is a lie.
Correct. If we want to have a liberation politics, all of us have to be part of the liberation politics. And that means also being attuned to the ways in which we create our own hierarchies and need to unpack them and work against them as well.
Self-identification is personal and somewhat fluid. While I could trace my paternal lineage to Cuba by way of Africa, when I'm in some white Latinx spaces, I'm not welcome. Ultimately, when it comes down to me and embracing this so-called inclusive notion of Latinidad that rejects blackness and indigeneity, I'm good. Let there be no ambiguity. I'm black. Blackity black, black, black. Y'all can keep that.
Angry guy here, and today we're...
Now about the... Well, that's really interesting about Latin America, and yeah, I guess it really explains some of the stuff I went to when I seen at church, because I used to see people at when I would go to like mostly church that was Latinas here in America, and a lot of what these people were talking about, I was really taken back, and I seen it on some people. I seen the way they responded to me, the way they reacted to me, and like I mentioned in videos before, now I see where it come from different places. Not everybody was like that, but wow. But I don't know, it was one video, Professor Black Truth showed that there were skinheads, not neo-Nazi Mexicans that were neo-Nazis. in Mexico City. And I was like, wow, that's just crazy. And Nazis, that's why I said this Nazi thing has gotten around. It's not just in Europe. It's not just in Germany and Russia and Ukraine. You got it in Mexico City. That they got a group of Mexicans that 2 or 3 that got the Nazi flag. Yeah, and there, I knew some reason why when I was in California years ago, I never desired to go over to Mexico, but that not because of that, but it was other reasons. And not to put everybody up under the same category, but that's crazy, ain't it? Blocky memento. Yeah. And Dominican Republic, I've heard a couple of people said recently, I've seen some passport bros go down there. Some people like it, but from what I hear, it's like, nah, I don't desire to go to Dominican Republic. And it's just things that I've seen. People try to make it out to be good, but I don't know, with the tourists and getting robbed down there, Jesus, left or right. Dominican Republic, man. And then, what if you get mistaken for a Haitian because you're dark complected and Negro features and like what the? Because it was couple people got pulled over. Now like this one woman on the one that guy named Phil. One of his commentators that they speak, Deetra. She said she went to the Dominican Republic and they thought she was Haitian, and they they kind of they said, oh, she's not Haitian. Like dang, but it's basically she was black, but they thought she was Haitian. So and that was like wow. Then I heard someone else say that guys that said they would rather go take their chance to South Asia or go to Africa than go to Latin America. And I'm like, wow. And yeah, they have some issues down there, clearly. I'm not saying that everybody do. There, there's some black people down there, but wow. And I remember that was a big thing years ago about brothers from down up here going down to Brazil. But normally they was talk about going to the black part of Brazil, because it's like in other places they kind of be knocking some heads off down there in the main city, because I guess they're crying whatever. They kind of rough up on the black teenager down there, man. So it's like I don't think I want to live someplace where it's worse. The prejudice is worse than just about as bad or worse in America. But hey, some brothers that have been down there said they didn't have no problems, and a few people that treat them nice. But yeah, I guess it all depends on what part of Latin America you go to. But wow, that's something. And I see why I guess either go to the Caribbean nation or go to Africa at this point, because like wow, white supremacy is in Latin America too. Light and whitening of the skin. It's not just in India. It's in Latin America too. Middle Eastern countries. And you can see the Bible taking place. Like wow, you have nations that we thought that were allies. Some of these people in a nation is classified as brown people really don't like black people. And I've heard incidents in California where there was Latinos, it was black neighborhoods, and how they ran in the black side of the neighborhood, they firebombed different places in California. Like damn. So And I've been to California. I've seen the tension out there. So yeah, that was back in the '90s. And I told a story about how I was with these brothers, man, and some guy did like this at us, whatever. I'm like, what the? And they're about to go back and beat this behind. I was like, God, dog. Yeah, that's why I said California ain't no joke, boy. You know. And I think, I hope this tension don't rise in other cities, even with some of these immigrants coming over, between the racial tension. Because you've got some people that come up with that through there with that mindset too. That's trying to get over here. That once they get here, some of them people get here, they start feeling themselves. You know. But it's like, it's almost like racism is kind of like passed down, and it's like with Professor Black Truth, it's like no one, there was one group going to it, but when the supremacy say jump on the black, they take turns jumping on black people and going against black, even though black people might not have no qualms of going against them, unless the main white structure come down on brown people, what they consider brown. But the white ones, it is good to go. So really, the Western nations like that, like America, Spain, and Portugal, and some parts of the European countries brought a color cast to the nations. And even over there, and not just in Latin America, but even I made videos about even in India. Like, wow, there's a caste system. In the Arab world, there's a caste system with black, with dark shades. And it's, just something about black people, man. I'm like, damn, it's crazy, man. Like, what did we do? I mean, you just can't help it that your ancestors came there due to some unfortunate circumstances, and then be treated like that and make it so bad. There's been some African heroes that helped push back against the invaded colonizers in Latin America, and they don't even acknowledge them down there. In Mexico, he helped Mexico. There was a black Latino dude that was a slave. He's a descendant. He got his own place down there, his own island named after him. And there's been a black president in Valencia in Mexico. He's part Mexican and part black, but yet Mexicans have a problem with race. There's Mexicans down there got a problem with race. And then and it's weird how they just now acknowledge Afro-Mexicans within 4 to 5 years ago. Like, wow, man. That's just crazy, man. And how we didn't even know about till one day. Thank God for the one young man that went down there. He went to go look for where these black towns in it. And I was like, wow, there are black towns in Mexico, black towns in Ecuador. You just never know. Black towns in Ecuador and in these white places, and they're like somebody you would see up here. But wow. But they're going through their own thing down there, and the only thing is the language is just a language barrier. But wow, it's the same old story, ain't it? In every land you go, if you're a black man or a black woman or a black child, it's the same story. You invisible till they want to make you invisible. Ain't that something? It's too bad that you can't repatriate all the black people back there, and we can all get along and get from the nations that don't want to be around black people no more. But it depends on where they want to go back. The ones out in Latin America, because they've been gone for hundreds of years. But man, to be subjugated to that's crazy. Black people are trying. There are some black people trying to get up out of the United States and go areas where it's mostly black, over back to the continent. And I see why, man. It's just that you can get free from that mindset. That you can feel like a human being without being castigated, put on a caste system. It's crazy, man. But yeah, the only way we get out of it will one day till the good Lord come back and handle all this. That's the only way. And yeah, I thought about going certain places. If I had the money, I would go down there. But I don't even know even with Colombia. You know, I don't know. You know, Argentina. Wow, that was just Jesus. I mean, I know there's some black people in Colombia, but it's like shit, man. You watch your way in certain places. You go in Colombia, probably like Argentina. That wow. I mean, and there's some pretty women down there, but wow, all because of color skin. Wow. But I hear brothers say, why would you want to go down and go through all that when you just go back to the continent? You don't have to deal with all that racism stuff, you know. I said, yeah, good point. Go to the countries where black people are welcome. And that's not an issue. You know, I definitely agree with that. This stuff is ridiculous. Block your memento. And yeah, you know, it's funny how when you say that black and brown, there ain't no black and brown coalition. They were right, because it's almost like there really isn't. It's like we're there only for you till we get our own interests up. That's what it sounds like to me. But I've seen it personally, that prejudice among some Hispanics and Latinos. I've seen it. You know, like wow, coming to Ohio with that mindset, like wow, you can tell where they come from, and you can just tell, like wow, it's sad that we gotta be like this and right in front of God in the name of Jesus. But yeah, it's a mindset. Don't even want to look at you and don't even want to stand next to you. Stand clear from you. I've seen this in Latino churches. And let's just say I didn't go back there. That's really messed up. It's like, dang, you know. I mean, I've been around some white people, but they ain't usually gonna be like that. Damn. Like, you know, you just like, ooh, don't brush up against me. I'm gonna get burned from you, or turn black or something. I mean, that's ridiculous. And I tell you about one video with my friend, the pastor. You know, he was like he was really doing good in the Lord, but when he got into the flesh, you know, he started pointing out some racial things in Spanish and everything. And I'm like, wow, ain't that something? And saw the woman's grandson, and that was black. And then one day I seen one of the members say, why don't you come back? I'm like, nah. I didn't tell him why, but I said, no, I can't go back there. When I sat back and really thought about it, and I really thought I bonded with people. I thought we had a bond in the spirit. He's only bonded people that look like them and talk and have the same language as them. And even though that they came from different parts of Latin America, but they even treated him as a couple other people who were dark in there like that, who were dark Latino. That's crazy, man. Yeah, I've seen it personally. So yeah, they ain't lying. And even though some could be, they can speak some English, you know, but you could tell. I seen the colorism. Yeah. But anyway, I just don't want to strand so negative. But shout out to my Afro Latinos out there if any of them come across this video. I feel you. I see what you go through, man. It's some bull crap, man. They just like some of these other nations. They just keep mocking us. Like just because God put this color of the skin is just these are the people that we think less than, and let's mock them, whatever. That's crazy. It's not your fault that the way you look, and you shouldn't have to feel ashamed. And really, the reality, if those Latinos only knew, if they read the Bible, and read I always say this in one of my read Revelation, the book of Revelation tells who the God of heaven is. That even though he's not black, but he's sure dark bronze. Feet like bronze, dark like burnt bronze. So you got a thing with color to those Latinos. Anybody, a white Latino, any Latino got this colorism and come across this video, you need to check the Bible. That's what I'm saying. And you find out the one called Jesus coming in the name of Jesus, because in spirit that's what he's described. Too bad, and they probably won't point that out to you in the Bible. Your Latino pastor probably won't point that out to you. But you really want to know what Jesus looked like? Ain't them paintings you got. Not the one that is going to look like when he come back into the earth. Not that race doesn't matter, because he loves us all. But remember one thing: if you ever take brass, and I always did this in the video. This would be considered brass as a penny. If you take glass, you take this brass, and you take this remote and burnt it, it would turn it into burnt brass. So you got to color what a person. What about a being is going to be part this, and part of his body is this. And then for the ones who are this is for the Latinos that are racist. And where does that say? Let God show you in the book of Revelation, in the book of Daniel. And what I'm telling you is the truth. It's not about race. It's not about black being lighter than white or being brown. That's a fact. Because there is no black or white or brown. When it comes to heaven, it's bronze. Bronze like gold, dark gold. There's no white in heaven. So I hope one day you leave this earth and realize there's no color. You need to work on that mindset before you leave this earth. For the ones who are like that. For the ones that ain't like that, God bless you. But the ones that got some color issue, tell your people in Spanish, read Revelation 12. That's my message to them. Alright then, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. Till next time, to my Afro Latinos, keep your head up. And to my indigenous Latinos, keep your head up. You're not a curse, you're a blessing. Remember that. God loves you. Yeshua loves you. And what they think is going to be last to be, is first down here and last down here, you might be first in heaven. It might be. Take care.